We have as a guest Lena Wolf.
Kazakh German.
Your family arrived because of the manifesto that was made by Catherine the Great.
You were sent to Trude Armia. If you're a German or you're Korean, you work there as well.
And you couldn't leave those places, and if you leave, it's imprisonment, right?
About the minorities that lived in their countries and what happened to them.
On May 31st, Kazakhstan marks the day of remembrance of the victims of political repressions and famine.
So our story got erased during the Soviet Union times, and I just would like it to be visible again.
Good day and welcome to the first series of the podcast Peoplestanica, where we talk with fascinating people with fascinating stories from Central Asia. And today the story goes much more beyond this region because we have as a guest Lena Wolf, who is a German who lived also in Soviet Union, who lived in current modern Kazakhstan, and who currently lives in London. She is the author of the graphic memoir, May the Universe Be Your Home. And hello, Lena.
Thank you very much, Dana, for inviting me. Quite excited to be also the first. And hello from London, to where you are.
I like to say firstly that I really much enjoyed reading the graphic memoir, and I didn't know about its existence until I saw your comment in our video section, and I was so fascinated to hear more about you, because I think your story represents not only just the story of 3 generations and even 4 generations of your family, but also stories of many Germans in Soviet Union. Let's begin our conversation with you saying why art form, specifically this art form you choose as a writer.
For me, it's a graphic novel or graphic memoir, and it's a memoir because it's a story about my family. So it's about our history. And graphic, it's because it's told in graphic form. So meaning that the book is fully illustrated, 200 pages illustrated. But it's generally a book for everyone, for young people and old people. And I love it even more when grandparents read it with their grandchildren and everyone in between. So it's a book for everyone to enjoy. It's a graphic memoir, graphic novel, or comic.
Yeah, this is not I would say, not the funniest piece that I've read, because during reading it, I cried twice, and it was very moving, touching, and really my generation, for example, not quite aware of the history of Germans, why Germans exist in Kazakhstan. And let's start with diving into the history. So your family arrived because of the manifesto that was made by Catherine the Great in 1763. And from that time, when exactly your family arrived, from where exactly, and can you clarify a little bit the beginning of the story?
So I think the beginning of our story is quite interesting because we came from German states. So at that time, there was not even one German state. There was little states under the Roman Empire. So we were talking about, as you said, 1763. It is also the time that the German states in Europe is generally in kind of flux of this wartime and poverty and famine and hunger. But the 7-Year War, which some people describe as possibly the First World War, that happened, just finished. And so the German states were kind of in a state of devastation. Everything was destroyed. There was little land. So people were coming from the front or from the army only to find that there's no land to live from. And so they were looking for something new, and they were looking for a new hope, a new beginning. And this is when the manifesto of Catherine the Great, who is of German origin herself, who became Catherine the Great, the Empress of the Russian Empire, and invited people to come. I have to say the invitation went out not just to the German people, so the invitation went to all of Europe. So French, Italian, Scottish, and some of them came. So there were Italian and French that came to the Russian Empire as well. A lot of Scottish missionaries, especially, came as well. But the largest probably group were a German-speaking group. And I do see it as kind of those people that went to this new country as pioneers, exploring a new country and hoping for a better life for themselves and for the generations to come. And for me, the most interesting part of the manifesto was that people were promised that they can keep their language and they can keep their religion, which for many people was incredibly important because some people that also chose to come to the Russian Empire were those whose religion wasn't really accepted in their countries. So we're also talking about Mennonites who came also not just from Germany, but from Holland, and or northern parts of Germany. And so this kind of keeping of religion, keeping the language, those promises were very important. But I think one of the biggest and most important aspects of this manifesto was, and also that they could get some land, and also tax relief for, I think, for a certain period of time. So it was very positive, attractive conditions. But one of the most important one was that, especially for people who suffered from the war and all the effects of the war and devastation, is that they were promised that they would not be drafted into the army. And I think that was one of the also very important aspects of these people. And I do find it that it's quite interesting that it is these people who kind of traveled from all those lands. And we need to remember that at this time, there was not that easy transportation there. So some of the journeys took up to 10 years to arrive in the Russian Empire. And and I do find it fascinating that those people who tried to escape war and start something new and peaceful and live from their land. And when we then think about 1941, when exactly that group that has lived on that land for over 170 years peacefully, farming the land and living from it. And this is for me fascinating then to see that it's exactly that group of people who was accused of being the kind of collaborators of Nazi Germany, even though they lived in the country for over 170 years. So, and this is what I find possibly it's in a way ironic, but in a very sad way that people were looking for peace. And that many years later, 170 years later, they were accused of something they didn't do and were punished for war in which they didn't participate. So I'm not sure. It's almost like the war was following them in a way. So they were trying to escape. And I think that's how my grandmother used to describe it. Said our ancestors tried to escape the wars and devastation, but the wars are always there and they catch up with you. And so you cannot really escape. And I think that's was her description of what happened in 1941, which we'll talk more about later. But my family settled, they came, they left pretty much pretty early in 1765, probably the exact time I don't have, but around that time from southern Germany. And they moved to Moscow and then later ended up in Ukraine. And this is where they settled. It was called Plana colonies. And this is when they end up staying most of the time. But there was always shift. There was always move to the neighboring country, like what is Russia now. So they moved from kind of the area of close to or Azov Sea or Zaporozhye to then Russia and then moved back. So there was constant movement there. Also because the German families, in our case, Catholic families, had a lot of children,
Mhm.
and it's usually sons who got the land. So they always had to get more land. So they moved to other places where they could farm and be self-sustainable. Yeah, that's a short introduction.
Thank you. Yes, from that period of your family living in Ukraine, we know the story of your grandma Emilia. And she's is a person who survived World War One, two famines, Bolshevik Revolution, Russian Civil War, World War Two, and it's very much dense life with like really frustrating conditions. I would like to ask, since in the book you are telling that you were close, it's seen that you were close to your grandma. What was she as a person, and how these scenarios of life, these episodes affected her character?
She said she was born at a very difficult time, just before the revolution. She was born just before 1917, and that's when changes started happening. I do think that my grandma was an extremely strong woman. But I think for me, and this is what she tried to teach us, is that for me in her stories, it was always about kind of humanity and kindness. So what I found sometimes quite fascinating is sometimes her description of quite horrific things like the famine, like the first famine, the second famine, the Red Terror, um, a lot of executions and people dying, and still keeping that hope and still kind of believing in the kindness and goodness of people. And I think that for me, that's the ultimate strength, really, to still find some humanity in the most inhuman of situations. So that's what I kept with from my grandma. But my grandma was an incredibly strong character. She was quite a German grandmother, if that makes sense. So she was quite so I grew up in Kazakhstan with all my friends. So my upbringing was really kind of in this multicultural, but also Kazakh society, right? And so the German aspect of who you are was always, you were always reminded who you are, and a lot of aspects of it was, and I think this is what she could pass on, is the food and some of the language, forcing me to speak German, even if I didn't want to. Forcing my friend Bibi Gul to speak German, like kind of integrating and saying, this is your culture, even though we're not officially allowed to speak German in the Soviet Union, you you kind of need to try your best. And so, yeah, the culture was passed in the most kind of in the household through food and through through baby attitudes as well, and kind of this like. I remember I used to kind of smile because in Aktobe, in Aktubensk where I grew up, she was the only one on our street who used to um, wash the part in front of the house. She used to wash it out with water,
Yeah,
which
we
was
also had the same.
like a yeah. So it's kind of like a strange thing to do. But because a lot of times there was a lot of sand and a lot of dust coming from the step and the stuff. But she used to wash it out with water, and maybe it was a Kazakh thing, but to me it was also quite a German thing because, and I remember kind of thinking, because my friends would go like, why is she doing that? Because there will be dust in a minute, right? But it had to be cleaned, kept clean and pristine. And then I remember I posted about it on Facebook saying my grandma had like those strange habits that I associated with being German. Like together with like baking always Zuckerkuchen and doing Strudel and like Krappel and certain things, certain German foods that we had. There were also things like that, like washing, in front of the house. courtyard, the courtyard.
Yeah.
And then someone on Facebook contacted me, and it was a lady from Argentina whose grandmother was a German from the Russian Empire, and they moved to Argentina, I think before the revolution, maybe 1917, but certain aspects of it still remained. And she said, you know what? My Oma is a German word for grandmother. My Oma used to do that in Argentina too. And we were just always stunned why she's doing that. And so I'm not sure, like, it's kind of like for me, that's what represented grandmother or Oma Emilia for me. Yes.
We just moved through time a little bit to Kazakhstan, and maybe let's clarify for the audience also how your family moved to Kazakhstan. And of course, it is vividly depicted in the book, and the stories of Nazis fighting, I mean, bringing the bombs on the trains while people are trying to save their lives. This is the place where really made me emotional and frustrated. And tell please more about that part when the family moved to Kazakhstan.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned also some of the parts that you like. It's lovely to hear it's lovely to hear. So yeah, so my family lived in Kazakhstan, and I have to say that my grandma Emilia was born in the Russian Empire. So she was born in the region of Rostov-on-Don, and I think it was after the first famine, possibly the second, that they walked all the way to Ukraine, to another Catholic German village in Ukraine. And this is where my mother was born. My mother was born in Ukraine in a village called Blumenfeld. And I have to say that at that time, so when they talked about Ukraine or even the region where they lived, Rostov-on-Don, they always describe it as incredibly multicultural. So my grandma always talked about all the different people that lived there. And she mentioned like the Chinese would be there, and there would be the Italians, and there would be the Tatars and Bulgarians and the Greeks. And there were all this kind of mixture of and Jewish people next door, and Ukrainians as well. So it was quite a multicultural environment. So my mother was born in 1940, and then the war started in 1941, and this is in August. This is when Stalin releases the order of deportation of all ethnic Germans. So, and we need to remember that the families lived there by that time, probably for about 170 years. So that's a lot of generations. I know in Kazakhstan, people, for example, talk a lot about generations, like 7 generations. That a lot of times seems to be a quite important number. I guess 170. That's probably just about 8 generations of people that lived on that land. And so Stalin decides that all ethnic Germans are in the whole entirety. So women, children, old people, everyone are collaborating with Nazis, and because of that, they all need to be deported. And of course, deportation happened in the most horrific of ways. So people didn't have much time to pack. And they were just told to come to the stations, and they didn't know what would happen. And if there were any men left, because the terror, the Red Terror before 1937-38 happened just before, so a lot of men were picked up already then.
Which has happened to your grandfather and your sister or brother of your grandmother, right?
That's correct, yes. And he was 17. So he was 17. And it's interesting that, so that was 1937 or 38. And so they call it, Stalin had something called the German question and the Polish question. A lot of Polish people were arrested and executed, and the same happened also to the German ethnic population. So the young brother of my grandmother, Alexander, he was picked up when he was 17, really young, accused of being a kulak at that time, or I think it's something else, whatever the accusation was. And the interesting thing was that my grandmother always looked for him. Like I remember even why when I was a child, so she kind of tried to write to Red Cross, or she tried to write to Soviet Union, to Siberia, to kind of different gulags, trying to find him. And it's only this year that I found out because I saw
Wow, you
some of
found
the
him.
archives. Sorry?
You found the relatives.
I saw his name on the archive lists that they got from the Ukrainian archives, and his name was listed, and he was kind of shot in pretty much in the first or the second week after the arrest. Um, but we didn't, we or my grandma's family didn't know that. So he was executed straight away. But so she waited for him, or she searched for him for probably all her life. Eventually, probably giving up, but still hoping. People don't stop to hope. But yeah, so they were picked up. So they were told to pack their stuff really quickly. They were taken. They had to walk to the um, railway station, and also they couldn't really carry much because a lot of times it was women and children. So just walking with children, you cannot carry a lot. So whatever you took with you, if you were clever enough, you took some warm clothes and some food. But a lot of people thought they will come back after a week or two because they were not told where they're going. So they were put on trains, men and women were separated, and I have to say that this separation meant they couldn't see or speak or write to each other for the next 10 years. That was prohibited, and if you did, you would land in prison. And people were sent to the opposite sides of the country, really. If men were sent to Siberia, women and children were sent to Kazakhstan, or the other way around. There were two ways to go. And so my grandma Emilia arrived with my mother, who was just still very young, yeah, still a baby. And so she arrived in Kazakhstan in close to Aktubinsk, and they were just dropped off in the field, in the steppe. So that was, but the deportation itself, and I describe it as well in my book, the deportation itself took weeks and weeks and weeks. So during the deportation, there was no food and there was no water, and the conditions were unsanitary. So it's already during that time that a lot of people passed away. And we don't have really a lot of data. The historians that kind of fight about those numbers, some say there were like 60,000 that perished, which is a huge number if you think about it. Some say 10, and some say 5,000, but it's still, for me, it doesn't matter if it's 5,000 or 60,000. It's still a lot of people, that women and children that were dying on the trains for absolutely nothing. They were just picked up and put in worst conditions ever, and they had to survive. So it's really like a survival. Someone needs to make a movie about it, because
Yeah, that's for
just
sure.
surviving the train journey would be amazing. And then they arrived in Kazakhstan, and this is when our story begins. And me as a second generation, I guess, growing up in Kazakhstan, but this was our beginning. Our beginning was deportation to Kazakhstan, being dropped off in the snow. It was also one of the coldest winters in 1941.
And your Emilia grandma also lost her mother on the way.
That's right. So they were put in different carriages, and those carriages, they were sent to different places, and you couldn't really, again, because they didn't communicate, they didn't tell you where who was going. So my grandmother lost her mother, and there was no way of finding her. And so all of those losses were part of that as well. So when they arrived in Kazakhstan, my grandma, it was they knew they couldn't survive more than one night. So they built a type of igloo just to protect themselves from snow and wind. And it's you're someone from Kazakhstan. I know Kazakhstan and Aktobe particularly can be incredibly harsh. You have, wind and snow and blizzards. Blizzards that are incredibly -40 is easy. And so if you have women and children just in the steppe and no trees, nothing to hide. So they were clever enough to build igloos and they did it with their hands and whatever they had. Those people that did those things, they survived. But really, it was only when they looked for help. So my grandmother had to make the decision and leave my mother and my uncle behind with someone else and walk and look for help because they knew they wouldn't survive another night. And that's when they got help. And that's when people came. They ended up going to Aul, and so people there were fantastic. And I love this thing where it's kind of like this German-speaking people arriving at this German Kazakh yurt. None of them speak the same language, but each of them understand what is going on. Each of them they know they need help, and you don't need many words to understand that. You see someone who's incredibly distressed. And I think my grandma said it's like just the kindness of people sharing even just a hot like cup of water was already just something very kind. And it was those people that organized then horses in the morning and ended up everyone helped out in taking the horses and then in the morning going to the place where they were dropped off and saving whoever was still alive. So that was so I love this contrast of this incredibly harsh deportation in the army and the soldiers just dropping people off, women and children, not caring whatsoever and saying, if you survive, you survive, but otherwise you're just fascists. We don't care about you. Even if you die, we don't care. Leaving them there with no help whatsoever. And then I assume it's the devastation and hopelessness, but then finding those people that actually in Kazakhstan that came and helped.
It's very touching. And would like to ask also about the other part of your family, the father's side. There was a grandma Josephine. Can you tell the story that happened to her and that side of the family?
Yeah, so my grandma Josephine was my father's mother, and she was also deported from Ukraine. And they were also deported to Kazakhstan, and they came to a slightly different place in Kazakhstan. They came to Kempersai. And I don't know if people know, but Kempersai, it's close to Aktobe, but it was one of the biggest kind of gulag system. It's called Trudarmia, but it was the same forced labor kind of gulag system. So when the Germans arrived, they all became special settlers. And this special settlement around Kempersai was pretty much a gulag camp. So there were soldiers, there were who were kind of controlling them and had to do this work. And it was ore mining, it was mining. So women and a lot of children as well used to do mining. And we're talking again about -40 conditions. And we need to remember that those people arrived in there, some of them arrived in their nice clothes because they thought they're just going away for 2 weeks and they will be brought back, and they put the best clothes on to show off, or to show their best side. So there were scenes of people were telling sometimes of people doing like the mining in kind of like little shoes with little heels and kind of like nice clothes because that's all they had. And of course those people they probably died first because they couldn't survive the cold conditions and the hard working environment. So my grandma came to Kimpersai, and the unfortunate thing for my grandmother was that she ended up in this Trudarmia, which was called Trudarmia, but really a gulag. And my father was there as well. There were no schools. for children. There was no medical kind of thing, and also there was no provision of food. So people kind of had to work for their food. So that was a very bad conditions. But it is the mining industry in Kazakhstan. It's kind of a lot of it is built on the shoulders of special settlers and deportees. So, and it's not only Germans, it's also the Koreans and Tatars and so on and so on. So a lot of people work in those mines. A lot of women did this incredibly hard work in mining. And this will be this part with Grandma Josephine will be part of my second book. I hope they will be able to do that because it's a fascinating story and it's something that is not much talked about as well. So part of our history. All of this history is very difficult, and really it's about pure human survival, and based in kind of survival in a political regime that kind of was put on them. And it's really still about women and children trying to survive. So if we talk about special settlements as we talk about the deportations and then the Trudarmia, which was compulsory. So it was a gulag, but the interesting part of it was that you didn't have in gulag, you had to be accused of some kind of a crime, right? You had to be accused of political crime or something else. Trudarmia was the same conditions. A lot of times they were right next to gulag, the same kind of management. But you were really imprisoned because of your ethnicity. So there was nothing else that you had to do. There was no crime to be accused of. And I think that's, for me, is quite a important thing to remember. So if you were a Tatar, you were sent to Trudarmia. If you were a German or you're Korean, you worked there as well.
And you couldn't leave those places. And if you leave, it's imprisonment, right?
It was a forced labor camp, at the same as Gulag. And the thing is that for Germans, for ethnic Germans, the special settlement, the ethnic Germans were also put under Kommandatura regime. So Kommandatura regime was another political thing that was put on them, and that was people spying on each other, which was horrific as well. And I remember reading that just in Kazakhstan, they trained like 3,000 spies, and then they would move them into those as neighborhood houses, like put them as kind of families pretending to be the same. And their job was to spy on each other. That means if someone is a German ended up speaking German, that's right, you will get another sentence or you will get harsh punishment. And also these special settlements until 1955, December 55, you were not allowed to leave. And if you left further than 5 kilometers away, and the punishment was so extreme that you could get 20 years. So you were taken from this prison and then sent to Vorkuta for 20 years. So that was all shot. So there were times when people were shot for leaving, for going any further than 5 kilometers. And I do ask myself, why those harsh conditions? Why such a horrible oppression? And I guess that all comes from those aspects of misunderstanding and hate. And I guess I don't know why those things were necessary for women and children of certain ethnic backgrounds, but it's almost unexplainable.
I would just want to note for the viewers that on May 31st, Kazakhstan marks the Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Political Repressions and Famine. It's a huge day currently, but it's gaining its popularity, let's say, because today more and more of the people are welcomed and kind of going out and expressing their emotions regarding things that happened before. But before, it was not welcomed politically to criticize certain actions of the Soviet Union, and because today it is associated with Russia, but today even on the governmental level, there are some shifts and changes and openness to explore these topics, I would say.
And thank you, Dana, for mentioning that as well. This is what for me that's wonderful to hear, because when I talk about all these things and the stories of my grandmother and survival, and they were strong, but really what it left, and I think it left those things on Kazakh soil as well, is this trauma, the suffering of people. And from what I learned by reading other parts about history as well, in order to move through and in order to kind of have a good future, you do need to come to terms with the past. And the first thing that you need to do is the acknowledgement. The first step is to acknowledge that it happened at all. And I think that's what you mentioned, the 31st of May. What this is a wonderful and sad, of course, commemoration of those things. But this is acknowledgement, and this is wonderful that that is happening. Because I think one of the reasons why I wrote this book as well is because apart from kind of the story being about those ethnic Germans and other ethnic people that were deported, who were moved from their houses, literally physically, what happened as well is that they were removed from history and country's memory. Like, they were removed from memory as people, they ceased to exist. And that's what this kind of gap in knowledge. And we know that something happened, but we don't quite know anymore because we forgot, because it was erased from newspapers and was erased from books and radio and so on. So the first step for me for the book was to give people their voice back, but also to kind of tell people the story and to say that happened. And the first step is to acknowledge and to say, yes, that happened and it wasn't good, but at least we know about it, instead of kind of constantly putting it under the carpet and kind of hoping for it to go away.
And I guess your family story can be shared by many people, especially many ethnic Germans who moved from Russian Empire in late 19th, early 20s to United States, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, all these countries, and probably many more. And I am glad that today we can reach and talk about it freely to the global audience. The viewers, if you will share any stories related to your past, if you are German or other ethnic group, we would love to hear it in the comments section down below, and we would love to discuss it even further. Especially, I would like to also thank Lena Wolf for bringing all this research into the book, that it's not just a novel, but it's also a very educational piece, I would say, because it includes the statistics, some horrific facts of what happened to the Germans in Soviet Union. And I would like to ask you about your personal journey related to creating this book, how the idea came and how you made the research. Because, for example, today I personally know many people who are interested in looking for the history, looking to archives, going to some like governmental websites in order to find some information about their past. How it was for you, the process?
So I started working on this book because I felt that I didn't understand myself, who I was. So the lack of knowledge about, I knew parts of the history from my grandmothers, but there were always gaps in my knowledge. And for the longest time, I ignored it, and I didn't quite understand. So I knew some stories, but I didn't understand the connections. And it was when I moved, first when I lived in New Zealand. So I studied in New Zealand, and when I kind of started talking about who I am and saying for the first time kind of quite clearly, I'm a German from Kazakhstan. And then hearing from my friends in New Zealand, kind of, who then said, "Oh my God, I've never heard of anything like that. What does it mean to be a German from Kazakhstan? Tell us more. Why were you in Kazakhstan?" So that was kind of my first initial step where I kind of thought, people want to hear about it. And when I started telling stories, I realized that I didn't have the full facts. And then I moved to so from New Zealand, I moved back to Germany and then to London. And this is kind of, I do say that in order to tell a story about difficult paths, you need to have a distance. You need to have the distance in terms of the time, but also literally the distance in terms of being far away from that country. It's almost like you're now far away, that you're safe enough to think about it and to explore it. And so for me, it was both time and the distance. And I was here in London, and I struggled to describe who I was. I think there were times where I would say, I'm Kazakhstani, I'm from Kazakhstan. And then people would say, really? You don't look like that, or you cannot be. And I was like, no, I am, because that's where I grew up, right? And they were like, no. And then I would say, oh, I'm German. But then, of course, because I went to school in Germany, and I lived in Germany. We moved to Germany in 1989, I think. So, and then I was like, well, but I'm not quite like the Germans in Germany. I am different. I have a different background. So in Germany, we also have this term called Russlanddeutsche, which is Russian German, which is the most confusing term whatsoever. It's like so confusing, because as soon as I say Russian German or German Russian, people just, but rightly so, they say, oh, so you must be Russian. I was like, no. But then you lived in Russia. No, I didn't. But then you were born there? No, I wasn't born there. I think there's at least for me now, there is this clarity who I am. I am a German from Kazakhstan, and my parents were German from Ukraine, and my grandparents were Germans from the Russian Empire. And that's just the way it was. And and I called myself, as you can see, I called myself Kazakh German, and that's my logo of the book as well. And it's kind of everywhere in the book. You can see it here. And I have a Japanese friend who now translated the book into Japanese.
While you hold the book, let's maybe go deeper into the production of the book. Who was the illustrator?
Exactly. So we have the book in 3 languages. Yeah. And then we also have it in Japanese, and Spanish is coming up. So there you go. So we have a lot of different things. But so a very good question about the book, because such a production takes a long time, and it requires different people to work on it. So I had the story, and I wanted to get the story done. So we have, I worked with a wonderful team. So we have Christoph Hoyer, who is an amazing illustrator from Germany, from Essen, city of Essen. And it took me quite a while to find him. So because I think working with an illustrator, it's quite a close collaboration. So you want to work with someone who can tune into the story, but also someone who's willing to learn about Kazakhstan and the Soviet Union and what it means to be. And Christoph was just amazing, right? So he wanted to know more about Kazakhstan. He loved drawing Kazakhstan. So we had a lot of fun kind of looking also at camels and tulips and different things and the white skies of Kazakhstan. So Christoph was and also he was quite good at doing the Soviet pages as well, which are the pioneer pages. So incredible amount of work, I have to say. The colorist was Esther, and she's from Spain, and it was wonderful to work with her as well. So she really brought kind of this life to the pages with colors, and it was wonderful to see, because colors are also such a great tool to able kind of to present the darkness and the sadness of the pages without even using too many words. or the happiness of the childhood in Kazakhstan. So me growing up in Kazakhstan, quite happy, the sunshine. So that's something that you can also bring in kind of into pages without using a lot of words as well. So I guess that's the graphic novel, and also the reason for me why I wanted to use the art of graphic novel is I think to start with is because sometimes I really struggled to express certain things, especially the difficult parts.
Mhm.
And the difficult parts of the history, it's almost kind of you feel it, and you don't necessarily always have the words to describe it. Illustrating it and using color and images is sometimes just a better way of passing on this information. We don't necessarily always have words to describe what it felt like. And also, I remember the stories my grandma was telling me about the deportation when I was young. And I felt that I wouldn't give it justice, but just describing it with words. Like it wasn't enough. So when I was thinking about the story, I wanted the readers to kind of see it. I wanted the readers to see the devastation, on the faces of the people, the disastrous conditions, the sadness and the horror as well of the situation. I want people almost kind of to touch and to feel and to be really there. And graphic narration like that, that's what gives the possibility for you, I hope, for the reader to see it, not just to read it, but to feel and to be there. So that was my hope. And it worked for me, um, as in terms of expressing what I wanted to do.
Mhm. What organizations and institutions also were participating in the creation of the book?
The German Ministry of Culture supported the project, which I'm incredibly thankful for. We also have the Museum for Russian German Culture History in Germany that was also involved. And Hessen Ministry support this project as well. Hessen is the land in Germany that support this project, and also a organization in the Hessen is the land where I live in Germany, in Frankfurt. And also IDRH, it's an organization for Russian Germans in Hessen, supported it. So there are quite a lot of people that come together to support it. But I really probably, and I'm without them, I wouldn't have been. So you do need a lot of people to believe in your project to actually complete something like that. It's a massive undertaking. It takes incredible amount of time for research, for the illustrations, for the coloring. And also, I would like to say we all live in different countries. So this is something that I'm really proud of as well. Christoph in Germany, I'm here in London, Esther in Spain, the organizations in Germany that supported it. It also represents who I am. Maybe the most proud I'm of is the people on GoFundMe. And people on GoFundMe, I have a special page that I dedicated to them, because this is truly people, truly from all over the world who supported me. People from Israel, Argentina, Japan, Korea, Ukraine, you name a place, they all came together. And I think that's, I'm very proud that a book can bring people together. So
Yeah, that's
thank you,
beautiful.
everyone.
I also would like to ask about the feedback from the book. You're already selling it, and we will have the link in the description if anybody would want to buy it in Japanese, Russian language, English language. What else?
So currently the book is available. If you are in Europe, you can buy the book from Amazon. And the versions available are English, German, and Russian. All of Europe, it's available. We almost sold out of the English. I think there are only 6 or 7 remaining, and that's pretty much it. So all the books are sold out, but we still have Russian and German.
An online version, right? Online.
Sorry?
The online version, not the hard copy.
So this is the hard copies if you wanted to have the hard copies, which is especially beautiful and put extra effort into lamination. Oh, and by the way, the book was printed in Latvia, which was important for me. Again, it's because the country where I was born. So we talk about being international. The country I was born, and the cover was designed by a artist from Ukraine. And she's someone who spent her childhood in Kazakhstan. So for me, it was important that she kind of understood what Kazakhstan is like. So I think she did an amazing job. So we have like stars here that are shining because they're laminated, and we have the robot and the clock that are always there. By the way, they're here as well. They truly exist. So my robot and the clock, they truly exist. They're always there. We do have all of them available as an ebook on Google Play. And I will also, as part of this interview, and to say thank you to everyone who will be listening to us, and I will reduce the price of the ebook for all over the world. So that anyone, wherever you are in, Kazakhstan, or you are maybe in USA or somewhere, or Argentina. So I'm reducing the price to $2.99. So hopefully that's affordable for everyone. And it's going to be for 2 or maybe 3 weeks after for you enough time for people to purchase it if they would like to. It's also the first ever graphic novel about a minority from Kazakhstan.
And the second book that you are planning to write, is it also going to be a graphic novel?
It's going to be a graphic novel, and it's going to be a story of my grandma Josephine and her journey from Kimpersai in Kazakhstan. She walked all the way to Ukraine to get to her village from which she was deported with no papers. So she walked at night with my father, who was just 7 years old. But also about her, for which she then, once she arrived in her village, she was arrested and she received 20 years as a political prisoner in Vorkuta. But I guess the time in Vorkuta is also quite amazing because it was a woman's prison, political prison with some interesting, fantastic and interesting characters and stories as well. And this will to survive, and also the will to kind of keep on educating themselves and speaking different languages. So my grandma learned so many different languages while in Gulag in Vorkuta, and it is kind of, to me, it's really representative of how many different nationalities were there. So she could even speak some English, which was like, how did you learn English in Vorkuta? But yeah, so I guess it's kind of tragic, but tragic in a way because all these people were in prison, all these women. But wonderful is what they were able to make out of it, the strength of these women.
Regarding the research, we kind of skipped a bit of this answer, but related to going to archives, maybe you would recommend some resources or some ways of searching for information regarding the past of the family, especially for Germans who are in the same situation like you.
So I for my research, so first of all, one of the wonderful things about Kazakhstan currently is, and Tokayev opened all of the archives for research so if you are of German heritage and you would like to look for your ancestry, you are able to find all of the documents in the archive. So this is an amazing thing in the first place. That means you have all the documents. So that's the first thing, and I will be actually there is someone I got to know Her name is Aralim Musagaliva, and she is an amazing researcher, a Kazakh researcher in Kazakhstan, who did a fantastic research on Trudarmia in Aktobe. And I love her thing also because she kind of looked at the woman, like at the names of women and who was registered there. And so, anyway, so she's fantastic, but I hope she will be able to help me a bit more with archives in Kazakhstan. This is one thing, but I guess for me, for my research, is it's a lot of reading, and there's so much online nowadays, so people really have all of the information available there's a lot of writing in English. Otto Pohl wrote a fantastic book on Germans in Kazakhstan. He's an American. Erich Schmalz as well wrote a lot is an American historian about Germans in Kazakhstan. So there's lots of research out there. So people will find, and especially your audience, people who probably speak different languages, they have the advantage to be able to read the papers in German, in Russian, and English, and that kind of opens your scope also quite a lot. I just wanted to say as well, you're the first person from Kazakhstan who interviewed me on about this topic, and I'm really thankful and I'm really glad that you did. DRZ, which is Deutsche Allgemeine Zeitung, they wrote an article about me. But with you, it's really kind of in-depth question, which I really enjoy to explore with you. So thank you for taking time. So our story got erased during the Soviet Union times, and I just would like it to be visible again and to be known worldwide. And I would be absolutely happy, and I will try and work on it, but I would like to get these books into schools in Kazakhstan as a first place, to kind of educate people on what happened, but also in an interesting way, and to tell people about the minorities that lived in their countries and what happened to them. And hopefully one day those books will be able to be for sale at Meloman or any other bookstore in Kazakhstan. But education and school would be my first goal.
And to wrap up our podcast and interview and our nice cozy meeting, I would like to ask you regarding your today's relations to Kazakh culture. Today you live in London, but at the same time you were raised in Kazakhstan. What things that you still remember and still kind of cherish regarding the influence?
Absolutely. So I will always be a German from Kazakhstan because that's what I know. I still drink my tea from Kisaika, and I still eat German Kazakh chocolate if I get it. I actually do have German Kazakh chocolate here. But they're also kind of those things, that the small things, like for example, friends coming over to visit me, and they all get some house shoes because that's what the way it is, And I did have like a with friends here Kazakh ceremony as well, where we sat and we kind of drank our tea and slowly, the way I love it how in Kazakhstan, kind of when Kasaika filled half, not to the top, it will be always in my heart. And the stories, kind of memories of camels and all those things, they're still there. But it's also I don't know, the politeness. Like I think people in Kazakhstan, and I would like, I appreciate people who are polite and kind. And I do think that it's quite a Central Asian quality. And also, this kind of not interrupting people and letting them speak. This is a wonderful quality from Kazakhstan. You don't necessarily have that in the West. So those things, to me, these things are things that I brought with me from Kazakhstan, including beshbarmak and plov and mante, and those things, the food, and chai stare, tara in my chai, although apparently not, they don't do it everywhere in Kazakhstan, but where I grew up, it was a special thing to have tara in new tea. And I love that. So whenever anyone goes to Kazakhstan, I tell them to get tara for me. So I love that. So these things will be always part of who I am.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. Hopefully many of you will read the book and leave in the comments your thoughts on these topics. We would love to hear. Thank you very much.